Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 3120XP chainsaw. The customer complaint is that it's got a broken anti-vibe mount, it's missing a bar stud, and he just wanted us to look it over. So I can see the bar stud's missing. I can see this anti-vibe mount is broken on the side of the handle. And as we go through this saw, we're just going to put an eyeball on everything and see what might need some attention. Before I do any of that, the same with all my repairs, I want to look in that cylinder, make sure that it's not scored. I mean, if the thing is, if the cylinder is roached, well, then we got to take a whole new approach to this repair. Spark plug don't look bad, it's going back in. The cylinder looked good. Now, some of you may be familiar with this saw. I guess it'd be hard to really pick it out, but it belongs to Chris from the YouTube channel In the Woodyard. He dropped it off and asked me to look it over for him. So that's what we're going to do. Looking inside the fuel tank, I've looked at a few of Chris's saws and I've never seen any water in the fuel. But the filters definitely do. I mean, it's ready for a tune-up. We'll pressure test this fuel line. Make sure it doesn't have any holes in it. And it's holding 10 pounds of pressure. Means the line is good and the carburetor is tight. Now, he didn't have any running issue complaints. But we're going to look at this stuff. So this anti-vibe mount is good on the bottom, but there's a limiting tab here. We'll get a closer look at that later. But it's not where it belongs right now. And I suspect that because of this one broken limiter, he probably had that 5-foot bar on here and he was laying into a log and put a lot of torque on it, and that anti-vibe broke, and then that limiter popped out. So this tab right here, that is supposed to be down inside of a catch or something like that. There's a recess for it. It popped out. Now he's also missing a bar stud. Well, bar studs don't fall out to the outside. They always fall to the inside, so we'll recover that in a little bit. But again, here is the big front anti-vibe spring. And we're going to pop this handle off of here. Now, the reason we're doing this, one, we have to replace the anti-vibe up there on the side of the handle. But you'll see that that limiting tab is also the threaded holes for the handle. So those holes pass through the fuel tank, but then they thread into that plate. And then that plate had a tab on it that was the limiter. It limits the travel, so when you're torquing on a log, you're not flexing everything out of shape. It'll hit the limiter and stop. I'm just creating a handle here for this spring to put it back in, so nothing funny going on there. So we'll put this limiting tab back in. So right now I have it in position where it belongs. But this thing's kind of hard to assemble, and I don't do a lot of them, so there's probably a better way. I just don't know what it is. You'd need one of them West Coast guys or someone like Donnie Walker to give you better advice on the way to do it, because you can see the tab is hanging outside of the pocket right now. Maybe compressing the spring is the answer. I'm not sure. I mean, you can do it like this. It's just, there's got to be a better way. So now I'm fighting the spring, and what I'm going to do is just kind of compress the spring and roll that tab in where it belongs. I had to do it that way because you can't put the screw in on the bar side first. and then expect to get that screw on the starter side in and get the tab underneath. At least I couldn't do it that way. So I had to put put the screw in on the starter side first. Get the tab into the pocket that it rides in, and then put this screw in. And then we'll tighten it up by hand. Yeah, that chain guide is worn. I should replace that. But I got this anti-vibe spring in there now, and we're all good to go. I will have to take that one screw back out to put the handle on. But I don't think that that plate's going to move now that the screws in the anti-vibe spring are tight. So there's our broken upper buffer, anti-vibe. I guess it depends if you're a steel guy or a husky guy, what you're going to call it. And here's the broken half that's still on the saw. Now there is a special tool that works on these. I don't know where mine went. I looked all over for it. So stuff happens. Stuff disappears. We're going to use a needle nose pliers. There's two dimples on that buffer. And a special tool would grab that dimple and twist it in there or back out. But in a pinch, you can do it with a needle nose. And I suspect that's how most guys end up doing it anyway. Just be careful that you don't like slip off of there and damage the buffer. So now we put our handle back on. I just want to put an eyeball on it and see if it's straight. You know, these handles, they're also part of the whole anti-vibe system. I mean, they kind of tie the tank and the crankcase together along with the anti-vibe springs and buffers. And if the handle isn't straight, you can put a twist in everything, you know. So here's the bottom screws. We'll get these in here. You saw I pulled that one back out of the plate, but everything stayed aligned up because I'm able to run that screw right back in. And now that we got those just kind of snug, we're going to look and see how that handle feels. You know, how it lines up. It'll tell us right away if there's a bend in it. It looks pretty good. So I would say the saw probably was never dropped. A saw this heavy dropped on the handle would usually put some kind of a kink in it. We get our anti-vibe screws mounted here. Crank that down tight. Yeah, feels good. And then we'll just follow up with a T-handle. Tighten them up by hand. All 5 screws we'll check. So now we're going to address the bar stud. I've secured a new bar stud, but I got to get the old one out of the tank first. So we're going on a little fishing trip, and we caught something on our second cast here. But the stud that the part number I looked up, it's like it's hard to tell right there, but it's almost a 1/4 inch shorter than the stud that was in there. And the stud that was in there, you know, it's not bad. We can reuse it. But look, if we just put that stud back in the hole from the tank, it's just going to fall back in there again. The hole in the crankcase is worn because the new bar stud did the same thing. It just kind of slopped into that hole. So we're going to kind of knurl the stud a little bit. And all I'm doing is taking a sharp chisel, and I got a big solid V block there. And we're just banging some grooves into the non-threaded portion of that stud where it passes through the crankcase. Now there's certainly better ways to knurl a bolt, but they're not available to me. Now you can see that with those banged up, you know, when you bang it with a chisel, the sides of where you're punching, they raise up. So you end up with a bigger diameter bolt than you started with. And now it won't push in there loosely like it did before. So now we're kind of going on a reverse fishing trip here, and we're going to put this thing back in. And it's pretty easy to do because you can see light coming through in only one spot, and that's the spot where the bolt's got to go in. So we drop the bolt in the hole and release it. And you do have to line the head of the bolt up with the inside of the crankcase. And the one thing I will say is if you use the method I use with a chisel to bang on the bolt and raise the edges, if you don't make an X pattern and all of your marks go in one direction, that bolt is going to turn as you hit it with the hammer. It's going to twist, and if you start it lined up and you start pounding on it, it's going to end up turning maybe a quarter of a turn by the time you get it seated. So do a X type of pattern on those with the chisel. And now, you know, not so much that anything ever was damaged when this came apart or during our repair, but I think just on the age of the saw and such, you know, we need to chase the threads on these studs. This one that had come out was a little beat up. But it cleans up good. I mean, that didn't take much to chase the threads on there. And we'll spin a nut on here to see how it feels. Yeah, that goes on there nice and smooth. And then we'll repeat the process on the other stud. There we go. All right, now because he said to look the saw over, we're going to pull the clutch off, and you know, I'm looking at the springs, I'm looking for excess heat. Ultimately, I want to grease the clutch bearing. We're going to look at the rim drive here. It's in good shape. Just going to wipe some schmutz out of the drum. Things, you know, we're inspecting it, right? We're looking it over. Here we're going to grease the bearing. And then we'll put it all back together. So on goes our clutch drum along with the rim drive, and it has to mate with the oil pump drive. So don't crank this clutch on there before you know that it's mated correctly. Then I like to pull the cord out before I hit this with the impact. And I'm not rattling on it. I mean, it'll naturally tighten up during use. And it was due for an air filter, so we're going to put a new filter in it. And then there's a cover that goes over the top of this filter. It doesn't go this way. That hole is offset. It's not in the center of that plate. You got to line it up this way in order to get the top cover back on. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 3120XP that needed a bar stud and anti-vibe mount. Thanks for watching. Later.